Okay. Bonjour. Hello, everyone. Mon nom est Natasha Lestage, gestionnaire de leadership des cadres supérieurs. Before we begin, we ask all online participants to pin the room on your screen and turn on your camera. Pour ce faire, cliquez à droite avec votre souris sur l'image de la salle et sélectionnez Pin ou Épingler. This activity is meant to be participative and we'll be using MS Teams polls applications as well as reaction buttons, including raising your virtual hand for the Q&A. For our online participants, once again, please open your camera and mute yourself until you're given the floor by our host after raising your hand. Should you have any issues or questions, you can send me a private message at any time. Pour les participants ici à Camsell Hall, veuillez s'il vous plaît ouvrir l'application MS Teams. Ainsi, vous pourrez participer au sondage en ligne. Levez votre main si vous souhaitez poser une question ou émettre un commentaire. Quelqu'un de notre équipe vous donnera la parole en vous présentant le micro. Just a reminder that this leadership activity is being recorded. I now turn over this NRCan EX leadership activity to our host, Julie Blais Comeau, Senior Leadership Advisor.
Merci, Natacha. Avant de débuter, j'aimerais faire la reconnaissance du territoire. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that since I am in the National Capital Region, I'm on the traditional, unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Nation. Je reconnais que l'on travaille tous à des endroits différents. Par conséquent, vous travaillez sur un autre territoire traditionnel autochtone. Veuillez, s'il vous plaît, prendre un moment pour y penser. Et maintenant, venu le moment, j'ai le privilège de vous présenter Monsieur Joshua Kutryk. He's an experimental test pilot for over 4,000 hours of flying experience on more than 40 aircraft types. Prior to joining the Canadian Space Agency, Colonel Kutryk flew as a developmental pilot for the Royal Canadian Air Force in Cold Lake, Alberta. He's worked on a variety of flight test projects, including out-of-control flying, simulator certification, automated navigation, and weapon guidance development. Previously, Colonel Kutryk served as a CF-18 fighter pilot, flying missions in support of NATO, the UN, and NORAD commitments around the world. He's been deployed to both Libya and Afghanistan. Joshua Kutryk a été sélectionné comme candidat astronaute en juillet 2017 par l'Agence spatiale canadienne. Après sa formation de base d'astronaute d'une durée de 2 ans, il a obtenu en janvier 2020 le titre officiel d'astronaute. Il travaille depuis à la NASA et c'est de là où il est arrivé hier soir. Il nous est arrivé de la NASA en qualité d'astronaute de l'ASC. Il occupe différents postes techniques et opérationnels, notamment celui d'agent de liaison. He's that CATCON between the spaceship and down below here on Earth. Au centre de contrôle de mission lors de sorties dans l'espace et de manœuvres d'approche de véhicules spacieux commerciaux. En 2023, il a été affecté à la mission commerciale Starliner 1 à la Station spatiale internationale d'une durée d'environ 6 mois. Il sera le tout premier astronaute de l'ASC à prendre part à une mission du programme des missions habitées commerciales de la NASA. Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, online and in the room, please welcome one of our own, a fellow Canadian, a fellow public servant, astronaut Joshua Kutryk.
Okay, that was a very warm welcome. Thank you. I'll try to follow it. I don't know if I can. This is the first one of the week, and it's always a little bit slow starting, but it goes without saying, thank you for having us. Merci beaucoup d'être ici ce matin. C'est toujours un plaisir pour moi, comme Canadien, d'être ici au Canada pour discuter des choses vraiment importantes pour moi, ma mission vers l'espace, la station spatiale, l'exploration d'espace et les choses que nous faisons maintenant à l'Agence spatiale canadienne. Je pense que je vais parler un petit peu de ma mission, sur l'exploration de l'espace, et puis on peut prendre des temps pour des questions et discussions. C'est vraiment à vous pour ça. The slides will change, I'm told. There we go. On peut commencer ici avec ma mission. Donc, oui, je suis encore, selon moi, nouveau astronaute pour l'Agence spatiale canadienne, mais j'ai été nommé affecté récemment à une mission de 6 mois sur la Station spatiale internationale. Je vais voler à bord de 7 véhicules. Ça, c'est dans la photo, ça, c'est le Starliner. C'est un nouveau véhicule, une nouvelle capsule qui a été construite par la compagnie Boeing avec NASA, avec ses partenaires comme l'Agence spatiale canadienne. C'est un véhicule vraiment important pour moi. J'ai travaillé avec ça pendant 4-5 ans maintenant. Et comme j'ai dit, je vais opérer ça pendant une période de 6 mois. Mais aussi, c'est bien important pour nous tous ici, pour le gouvernement du Canada, pour notre pays, le Canada, parce que nous sommes un partenaire avec ça. Pas juste avec ça, cette mission, oui, bien sûr, mais avec tout ça, avec l'exploration de l'espace, avec la grande aventure, avec la NASA, avec les autres partenaires. Nous sommes un partenaire. Ça, c'est une chose vraiment importante pour le Canada. So this vehicle launched, I mentioned it's new. It launched for the very first time last week. This photo was taken on Wednesday. It's Cape Kennedy in Florida. I've been working on the engineering team, the test team for this spaceship for a long time, since about 2020. It's never flown with humans before. We launched 2 astronauts for the very first time on Wednesday. That's a photo taken a couple seconds after launch. My role leading up to that point was as their Capcom, you heard in the intro. So I was the link, I am the link between mission control in Houston and the astronauts on board. It's a role that, you know, you spend years and years training for, simulating, going over everything that can go wrong, testing, flying the vehicle, finding problems, fixing it. But eventually we got to that point last Wednesday. It blasted off. It's really neat if you ever do get to Florida and get to see a launch. The energy is dramatic. I mean, it's going well more than 100 miles an hour in this photograph, and that's only about 2 seconds after launch. It flies up the seaboard of the United States, flies very close to Canada, actually, St. John's. We had Canadian rescue forces on standby alert in case it aborted into the ocean off St. John's. After about 4 minutes, the vehicle comes apart, it stages, and most of what you see in that photograph disappears. Comes back to Earth. A second stage lights, keeps accelerating. After about 9 minutes, that whole thing is halfway around the world. It's going Mach 25 times the speed of sound. Still not quite fast enough to maintain an orbit in space, but then we do some more burns and orbital maneuvers, and eventually we get it into space. So it's docked right now to the International Space Station. I have a phone in my pocket, and someday, I hope next week, the phone's going to ring, and they're going to have a landing date when we're going to do the first re-entry, return to Earth, and landing with this spaceship. And I'll go back to Houston to control it from Johnson Space Center. So space happening right now very quickly. This is another photograph from the Cape, Florida. And again, some of you may have been there. I go there all the time. So this is Cape Kennedy, Florida, where we launch humans into space. And to me, it's like looking at the future. And that's one thing that I want to impart to you folks, if I can, is the rapidity, the speed with which space and access to space is changing, because there's profound implications of that. This is just one example. I mean, last week we had the Starliner launch. We had Virgin Galactic's launch on Saturday. I got to see that. We have right now China operating on the far side of the moon with robotics. We had SpaceX's Super Heavy launch. That's a vehicle that's going to completely change the world. We are probably where we were, I think, with aviation in about the 1920s. If we were here talking about aviation in 1920 as public servants, you would know what an airplane was. You probably wouldn't know anyone personally who'd flown on one. It was something very expensive, very dangerous to you. You'd have no idea of how fundamentally different the world was going to be in a few years, well within one person's lifespan. A decade in the 60s, we had Apollo, we had the airline industry, the world as we know it today. This is a neat example of this. This isn't launch, this is landing. So these boosters take off. they come down in formation, they land here, they're refueled, they fly again. The first time that's ever been done was in 2015. When I was getting into this whole business in 2012, I remember studying flight test engineering. I was in the US, and SpaceX had said they wanted to do this, which was land boosters, refuel them, launch them again. There was a very strong opinion in technical circles, engineering circles, that that was impossible, that that was not going to work. SpaceX persisted. They achieved it. Since then, they've done it, I think, now 300 times. They're making space access like we made air access in terms of cost and accessibility, and that's changing the world, and it has implications for us as public servants. Je suis maintenant astronaute de l'Agence spatiale canadienne. Mais avant ça, bien sûr, j'ai fait autre chose. J'étais pilote d'essai, j'étais pilote de chasse. En fait, j'ai travaillé pendant toute ma carrière, mais non, j'ai 24 ans avec le gouvernement du Canada en tant que fonctionnaire public. Et je suis au courant avec le fait que cette semaine, nous célébrons ça, nous célébrons la fonction. Je suis fier de ça, je suis fier de mon histoire, mon carrière avec l'aviation royale canadienne. C'était en 2017 que j'étais sélectionné, recruté par l'Agence spatiale avec Jenny après un processus de sélection qui a duré un an. C'était tellement difficile, tellement long, mais à la fin du processus, nous avons été choisis, sélectionnés pour rejoindre cette équipe, l'équipe actuelle des astronautes canadiens. Nous avons moi-même, Jenny, David Saint-Jacques, le dernier Canadien, de faire une expédition de longue durée dans l'espace. Puis Jeremy Hansen, l'astronaute qui va voler à bord d'Artemis 2. On va parler de ça en quelques moments. Prochaine. Donc, juste un petit mot pour ça, pour ma carrière avec l'agence jusqu'au moment ici ce matin. Après que j'ai été sélectionné, avec Jenny, nous avons déménagé à Houston. Nous avons commencé à faire l'entraînement technique, de suivre un cours d'entraînement pour devenir astronaute certifié à la NASA. C'était un programme de 3 ans. Nous avons passé beaucoup de temps dans des environnements comme ça, sous l'eau. Ça, c'est le laboratoire de flottabilité à Houston. C'est une grande piscine on utilise ça pour fournir un environnement, une simulation de microgravité. Après ça, après que nous avons certifié comme astronaute à la NASA, nous avons commencé à faire 2 choses. Premièrement, nous avons continué de faire l'entraînement technique. L'entraînement, c'est un sujet continu pour nous tous comme astronautes. Mais aussi, deuxièmement, nous avons commencé de faire les travaux dans les postes techniques qui sont effectués par des astronautes à NASA, ici sur Terre. Et pour moi, je suis devenu pendant plusieurs années un expert, un spécialiste dans ce rôle. Ça c'est le rôle de CAPCOM, ça veut dire le lien direct entre les astronautes dans l'espace et les ingénieurs, les équipes, les scientifiques ici dans le centre de contrôle de la mission à Houston. Moi, je travaille encore aujourd'hui avec Starliner, mais même au passé, j'ai travaillé pendant plusieurs missions d'arrimage avec la station, pendant les lancements, pendant les sorties dans l'espace pour des astronautes de la NASA, canadiens aussi. J'ai mentionné déjà que nous avons besoin toujours de faire de l'entraînement. L'entraînement technique, oui, mais aussi l'entraînement comme ça. Ici, ça, c'est une photo souterraine en Europe. J'ai passé 3 semaines ici avec une équipe de 6 astronautes internationaux pour faire la science, la recherche scientifique, l'exploration d'un système de caverne. En anglais, on utilise les mots space analog. So everyone is aware of the technical training that we do, but we also do training that you see in this photograph where it's not necessarily technical, it's us going someplace that is like space, not in the technical sense, but in the sense that it's a very high risk, high consequence environment. That's the words I've used to describe it. The next thing that you do, your next 10 seconds are really, really important. because it can have catastrophic consequences, whether or not it's just you getting up and finding yourself something to eat, or whether it's the science that you're working on. We were doing microbiology here for researchers from around the world. It's a very high consequence environment, as is space, and teamwork, leadership, how you get along with others are all things that come to play a very important role. We spend a lot of time in gyms. We spend a lot of time being medically tested. So just some snapshots from my life right now. I am preparing, and that's what we're going to talk about next, to fly in space for 6 months in 2025. That's a long time. There's implications of that for the body. And so A, we're tested a lot medically, but B, we're also starting now a year out to do a lot of physical training that's going to continue through the mission and after the mission in order to make sure that the human body, this part, can be brought back to health after. If you don't do anything, if you send someone to space for 6 or 7 months without focusing on this, you come back in really rough shape, unable to walk, balance. Your brain has changed, your cardiovascular system has changed. So we're in a process now of trying to mitigate that. And yeah, we spend time doing that at least every day. So we'll talk about this now for a few minutes. This is the CAN 4 mission patch. CAN 4, ça c'est le nom pour la 4e mission de l'Agence spatiale canadienne à bord de la Station spatiale internationale. Ça c'est mon inclusion personnelle pour la mission. La mission va lancer en 2025 ou plus tôt. Je pense probablement en 12 mois. It will be a 6-month mission. In this patch, you see things that I think are important to us at the Canadian Space Agency, that are important to us as Canadians, that are certainly important to me personally. Service to Canada as a Canadian public servant, the flag. I am beyond anything else proud to be Canadian, proud to be doing in the United States what we're doing as Canadian astronauts with the Canadian patch on my shoulder. You see the beauty of our planet, the importance of protecting it, especially, I've been all over the world, and many of you probably have as well, but I will tell you, especially as you see the beauty of that planet here in Canada, it's unique in the world. And then you see what we're trying to do. We all have different things that we're trying to accomplish, but for me, my calling and what we're trying to do in my part of the agency that I work at is advance technology and advance this grand adventure of space exploration for the benefit of all. And we're trying to go from airplanes, which is the last 100 years, to sustained human presence in low Earth orbit with the space station, which is what I'm doing, and then onto the moon, and someday, hopefully, this generation, onto Mars. Some more photos here. This is a picture, another picture of CST-100 Starliner. This picture is taken as it's approaching the International Space Station. Everything you see in these photographs is moving at close to 30,000 kilometers an hour. So you need to keep that in mind. It's a highly complex environment. Obviously, it takes hundreds of people to make this all work in the end. This vehicle is also about proving new technology. It's a step forward. So the United States is trying to commercialize low Earth orbit, commercialize access to space because of the opportunity that they think is going to be there. And we agree with them for the most part if you look at Canadian policy. So opportunity economically, opportunity for discovery and innovation. Because of that, we want to commercialize space. We have SpaceX in the United States that has built a vehicle that can carry humans into outer space. And we have the second provider, which is Boeing, that's built this one. This one's pretty special. It develops a couple new technologies that have never been used before. It relies on synthetic vision. It can dock with anything, uncooperative target docking, we call it. It lands on land. That's also something new for the United States and its partners, and it brings with it a host of possible applications for the future. So it's all about developing new technologies so that we can go to space easier and make use of the opportunity that waits for us there. I'm going to fly that vehicle to the space station, to this place. So ici, vous pouvez voir la destination. Bien sûr, ça c'est la Station spatiale internationale. Un laboratoire flottant en orbite basse autour de la Terre. C'est une place vraiment unique au monde, un laboratoire unique au monde. C'est un laboratoire qui nous permet de faire avancer nos connaissances de le corps humain, par exemple, de faire avancer la recherche scientifique, les découvertes scientifiques. It is a unique in the universe laboratory, and it allows us to do things that we would never otherwise be able to do. We do science here that we cannot do on Earth or any other place that we know of in the universe, and that's why we built it. It is likely one of the most expensive, certainly the most complex thing that humans have ever built. And so it's awesome for that. It's also awesome that we built it together. And a little bit of history here. It was built over about 20 years. We're entering now the phase that we call utilization, which is where we're starting to slow down the building of it, and we're starting to ramp up the usage of it, which is using it for science exploration, Canadian university experiments, for example. Canada is a prime partner on this. And everybody sort of takes that for granted, but I just want to give you a little bit of perspective on that. The other prime partners, this is one of the most monumental technical achievements of humanity ever, as are the Artemis missions that are coming, and we're also a prime partner on them. But we were a prime partner on this since the 1990s. The other partners, of course, you have the United States, you have all of Europe combined, you have Japan, you have Russia. We don't talk about that one so much, but it's still important to talk about because it's amazing that we're still cooperating with them. I mean, this is a beacon in the sky, a testimony to what we can do when we collaborate and not compete, when we prioritize properly. But so we have those four aerospace giants, and then we have little Canada, a prime partner. It's amazing, actually, that we pulled this off, and it has had really profound implications for Canada, past, present, and future, I would say, for our prosperity. It's a good thing. If you don't know, we don't buy astronaut flights in Canada. We build stuff. We design technology that they don't have anywhere else in the world. You see some of that robotic technology in this picture. We try to develop technologies that we think NASA needs for its missions, technologies that we think we can commercialize as an industry in Canada someday. And then in the early days, we give that technology away. We give it to NASA, and in exchange, we get missions like the one I'm going to fly. We get to participate in these amazing adventures. So I'll spend 6 months there in this environment. You see more Canadian technology hanging off ISS here. Mes devoirs vont consister, je dirais, de deux choses principaux. D'abord, je vais faire toutes les opérations pour la station. Ça veut dire que je vais faire l'entretien, je vais faire les sorties en espace, je vais faire toutes les choses pour garder en bonne forme, bon fonctionner la Station Spatiale Internationale. We have to be experts at all of these systems that you see in some of these photographs. It's really complex. I spent a lot of time in school before going to NASA. And when I got to NASA, I realized I was going to spend the rest of my life in school. I mean, for this mission, I've been training for years already. If you took all the training that someone does before going here for 6 or 7 months and put it back to back, it's about 7 years of technical training. So there's a lot to know. The second part of my work is going to be science. So deuxièmement, je vais faire toute la science pour les chercheurs scientifiques ici au Canada, bien sûr, mais aussi du monde entier. Comme j'ai déjà dit, ça c'est le but, c'est un laboratoire flottant, c'est une place qui nous permet de faire la science, les découvertes scientifiques, l'innovation. C'est aussi une place qui nous permet de tester des nouvelles technologies, des technologies qu'on va utiliser comme solution pour les problèmes ici sur la Terre, mais aussi des technologies qui vont être vraiment utiles pour les prochaines étapes dans l'espace, les prochaines étapes vers la Lune et j'espère aussi vers Mars. Of course, I'm pretty excited this year because I'm entering the very final stages of this, doing it for Canada, for the Canadian Space Agency, but on a personal level, also doing something I've always dreamed of. The past number of years have been an absolute amazing experience for me, getting to work in this environment, but now transitioning from doing it here on the ground to doing it in space, hopefully, has been something that has been really remarkable. I mean, I feel lucky beyond anything else for every day that I have as a member of these teams. I feel very excited, of course, because this is something I'm passionate about. I've been dreaming about it my whole life. And I feel proud. I have to say that even once more. Proud not just to be doing it as an astronaut, but as a Canadian one with the red maple leaf on my shoulder, because there's not many of us down there. And for the world, there's not a lot of countries out there. In fact, there aren't any that are, by certain metrics, size, population, GDP, that are doing what we're doing in space. This is a hallmark achievement for Canada, of Canadian policy. It's one we need to be aware of, proud of, and it's one we need to try to keep going as we move into the next couple of decades, because it's important for our future. This is an example. I've been talking a lot about using the space station for science. Just one example, we use it to test technologies that we're going to take into space, but we also use it for problems that aren't related to space at all, the problems that we need to solve here on Earth. The medicine field is a big one of those. I'm not a doctor, but I'm trying to become one now. I spend a lot of time now learning how to do medical science that I'll be doing aboard the International Space Station. The thing about living in space for a long period of time is that it's very, very bad for the human part, for the astronaut. There's radiation, the microgravity causes bone loss, muscle loss, cerebral changes, all of that. And so we at NASA have to figure out how to solve those problems so that we can go to Mars and back, which is a mission that's going to take 2.5 or 3 years. But as we solve those problems, we solve a lot of problems here on Earth. Being in space is like taking the aging process that we all succumb to at some point. I'm starting to get gray hairs. And it's like taking that and hitting the triple fast forward button on it if you used to have an old VCR. So it's not good for this guy, but it's really good for science. It lets us study all of these systems. We've found solutions in space, things like osteoporosis. It's an absolute perfect place to study the human body and to study medicine, to innovate, to find new healthcare methods, test drugs, etc. Another picture of a Starliner approaching the space station in space. This is the space station here, just the absolute tip of it. The space station has become so big that it's sometimes hard to put into context, but it's about a football field size, right? So it's massive. That all had to be launched on individual rockets. It all had to come together at orbital speeds, 30,000-ish kilometers an hour. Canada, by the way, put it together. So we built the robotic technology that assembled the space station, and we're right now in this country, this city, in fact, and others, designing the robotic technology that's going to put together the next space station in orbit around the moon. My crew, so there's 4 of us, and they haven't all been announced yet, but they're international, so I'm only showing you pictures of me, and it's all proprietary, so I'm only showing you pictures of white walls. But the point I want to deliver is our mission's a little bit unique. We're going to space station on behalf of Canada again to do the 6 months of science and operations, but we're also, for NASA, flying this vehicle on its maiden operational long duration flight. And so that's a twist. We have a lot of testing to do and have been doing for years. Test development, rework, refix, retest, retrain. We're the first ones going through it. This is just me in a mock-up testing stuff. This is us testing a water landing. We're not supposed to land in water, but there's a lot of water on planet Earth, and so we designed a spaceship that can land in water if things go really badly for us and we end up just missing our landing point by a long, long ways. But Starliner, like everything we do in space, is about advancing technology. And so one of the technologies we've designed for this vehicle is the ability to land on land. In theory, we can pick a landing spot, land it anywhere. We could land it in the middle of Ottawa International Airport. We're a long ways from doing that, but the technology is on board to allow folks to do that in the future. And that's an example of a big step forward. In fact, if you're interested in the technical parts of this stuff, you should watch, because next week, I think we're going to try on the 18th to bring that first test flight home. And we're going to land it in a desert in New Mexico. And if you're interested, watch it, because it's going to do something that we've never done before. So when you come back to Earth, you have a speed problem. You're going too fast for anything to be survivable. And so we use rockets to burn off a lot of that speed, and then we use heat shields and friction and physics to burn off a lot of speed. And then we use a complex system of parachutes to burn off even more speed. But we're still going too fast to survive when we hit the desert of New Mexico. And so other spacecraft, that's why they go into the ocean. With Starliner, we're actually going to land on a giant, instantly inflated balloon, essentially. So it's airbags. And that's what makes the final bit of energy survivable. And if we prove that that can be done, then we can take even more steps towards landing this anywhere. And that has big applications for science and for operations in space. Just more pictures. That's the Boeing suit. Pour la fin, ici, j'ai besoin de parler de ça. Parce que, en même temps que nous sommes à l'Agence spatiale canadienne en train de préparer pour ma mission, la mission de Can 4 vers la Station spatiale internationale, nous sommes aussi en train de préparer pour ça. Ça, c'est la mission d'Artemis 2. Ça va être une mission historique. Nous pensons que ça va lancer en 2025 aussi. Ça va être le premier retour des humains, des astronautes vers la Lune depuis le programme Apollo. It's going to be the fastest and the farthest that anyone in the history of humans has ever gone. It starts a series of several missions going back to the moon. And the most important thing that I want this group to realize of why this is special is because there's a Canadian on board. And, you know, even when I joined in 2017, had you told me Canada, you know, the Artemis missions were all mapped out, but had you told me that Canada would be on Artemis 2, the first, I would never in a million years have believed you. But we did it, and we're on it. We are the only country in the entire world participating in it. So we were a prime partner on station. We were the first prime partner to sign on to Gateway, which is building a space station around the moon. We're developing that technology in Canada right now. We're the first person to fly on first country to fly on an Artemis mission with the US. The other three are all American. This is a profound achievement for the government of Canada, for Canadian policy. Yeah, thank you. And it's not just special because he's my friend and he's going to get this awesome experience. It's special for Canada in terms of the future prosperity that it's going to open up, an opportunity. And I don't think that, you know, that red dot is that far off. I think that if we do everything just right, and we have been so far, if we, like I always say, collaborate first instead of compete, if we prioritize, if we work together, if we don't make ourselves more problems here on Earth, but start really focusing on solving some of them, it's not a stretch to believe that we're going to end up on that red planet in this lifetime. We're certainly going back to the moon. This is hardware that's being built right now. I walk out of my office in the US and I run into this stuff. So there will be astronauts on the surface of the moon working, doing science for long periods of time here in the 2020s. That's on our doorstep. The missions are happening. We're on the first one. And then, of course, Mars is there as NASA's ultimate goal. And I hope that Canada will be there too. It's difficult for us to see how humans would live and work on the surface of the moon, even more so on the surface of Mars. But of course, that's what we do. That's why spaceflight is important at its most fundamental level. It's because it takes what has always been impossible for one generation and makes it a daily occurrence for the generation that follows. If you look at the technology, the innovation, the discoveries that come along the way, that's what it does, the impossible to possible, and that's why we do it. And just because we can't envision this necessarily, I can envision this. I know some of the technical details, but I understand that many people can't. But I don't think that's any different than again, being here in 1920 talking about airplanes and trying to envision folks walking on the moon in that same lifetime, which happened. So I think it's a pretty exciting future ahead, especially for us here in Canada. I'm going to close with this, and then we'll move over to the interactive part. I know that I have a government audience, and more than that, an NRC audience. I am always talking about what we do with humans in space because that's my specialty. That's my passion. That's what I do. But it's important for folks to understand that that's just such a very small part of what we're doing in space. Of course, another major component of what Canada does in space for Canada and for countries around the world is Earth observation. And again, we have technologies that we've built in Canada that they haven't built anywhere else. Earth observation, synthetic aperture radar. We changed the world with RadarSat-1. We changed the world again with RadarSat-2. And we changed it a third time with the RadarSat Constellation mission, which generated this. This is imagery from RCM. Folks here probably know that. I know NRC definitely uses data. But the perspective that I can offer you, I'm not an EO expert or an Earth observation expert. The perspective that I can offer to you in closing is that it becomes more and more clear to me every day that we are very dependent, completely dependent on space for our day-to-day operations here on Earth. Personally, professionally, as a country, our prosperity depends on space. Space has become full of what is essentially critical infrastructure for us. And the second thing that has become very apparent to me is that the solutions to some of our most challenging problems here on Earth are going to come from Earth observation. The most glaring example of that is climate change, and that's sort of what this photograph is set up to show you. But the ability to study, to record, to observe continuously planet Earth through satellites that Canada has made and is making open to the wider world, but also through the host of satellites that are being developed by the United States and other partners. That's something that is going to fundamentally change our ability to tackle some of the biggest problems in places like climate change, agriculture, food production, the efficiency with which we do all of that, resource management, fisheries management. This is all being informed from outer space, in large part to assets and technologies that Canada has developed and needs to keep continuing developing going forward. RadarSat Constellation mission right now, I think actually tomorrow's the 5th anniversary of its launch, but then whatever follows, we need to keep going. I mean, already, I believe right now there's over 40, il y a plus que 40 ministères fédéraux ici au Canada, ainsi que des entreprises privées qui dépendent sur ça, qui dépendent les données de l'observation de Terre par les satellites dans l'espace. Ça, c'est une chose vraiment importante. Ça, c'est une chose qui va contribuer à notre capacité d'observer, de comprendre, de protéger notre maison, notre planète, la Terre. And so on that note, I want to acknowledge what you all do, the importance of it to Canada, but also the importance of space and our joint effort here, not just with the exciting human stuff that I talk about all the time, but with putting infrastructure into space that can help us here in this country and others around the world to tackle the problems of this generation. And I think with that, I'll close and we'll move on to questions. I'd happily take any that you have. Thank you very much.
Merci, Joshua. Je ne sais pas pour vous, mais pour moi, dans ma tête, là, c'est comme si j'avais eu un vulgarisateur de tous ces films qu'on a vus au fil des ans. And I can certainly have all the faith in you. Like when they say, Houston, we've got a problem. Well, you know what? Joshua's going to be right there taking good care.
My mom pointed that out the other day. I never even thought of it, but she was talking to kids and she said, he's Houston. And I said, what do you mean? She's like, well, in all the movies where they say Houston, he's the one that answers. And I guess that's true. I'm Houston.
Yeah. And all of us can say, I know Houston. Thank you. If you'd like to have a seat or please stand. Alors, mesdames et messieurs, pour vous donner la chance de réfléchir, d'absorber, on va débuter avec un nuage de mots. So we're now going to turn it over to you. If you're in the room, if you're online, you can open up your phones if you're in the room and go to this meeting. And what's your definition of leadership? Comment décrivez-vous le leadership? C'est un nuage de mots. It's a word cloud. We're going to be able to see it populate, Josh, as it's going to come up. And you have like just a few moments to think, what is your definition of leadership? Okay. We'll come to you at the end. Alors, comment définissez-vous le leadership? Un mot? Peut-être que c'est une citation, maybe a quotation, maybe once upon a time somebody told you, maybe it was a manager, another public servant. My definition of leadership is blank, blank, blank. Alors, on va regarder les nuages de mots. Alors, collaboration, well, you said that a few times, so not surprising that it's up there. La force, fearless, advice, support, others. Lead, we're over here. Zach, is it possible maybe for us to see it at the back over here? I don't know, but we're seeing 34 responses, and I'm seeing there's about 100, close to 140 people online and in the room. Collaboration, inspiration, example, service, équipe, enabler, passion, value, risk, listener, role model.
I like them all.
Yeah. Did you?
We'll let people keep thinking on that. I have a word, and I'll share it here in a minute. It's not up there yet, but it might be soon. I worked for the government for over 2 decades now, and it's funny, right? Because at my young 20s, when I joined at the public service, in the military in that case, leadership was so important then, and it still is today, because we're the government of Canada, and everybody follows our example for what leadership means in the government, but also for the wider country. And anyway, I remember that. I still remember it. The definition at that time, the definition of leadership, this is something that changes like the seasons, it seems, but at that time, the government definition, if you were just joining, was the art of influencing human behavior in a way so desired by the leader. Way more than one word. That's not my answer, but I just want to tell you, I remember that. And it left an impact on me because it is what we do. It's what the government does, and it's important. I like all of those. Some things that jump out at me are risk, passion, fearless advice. Yeah, so I'll share my word. It's action. And, the perspective on that is I've spent all this time, I've been so lucky. I've had so many wonderful experiences in the Air Force and now at the Canadian Space Agency. I've seen some of the best leaders, I think, that I will ever see in my life. I've gone to work with them. I've gone to work with them in combat, at the Space Agency, in all kinds of places around the world. The challenge we have, in my experience, isn't necessarily inspiring folks, motivating people. We have amazing people who work in the public service, and they are inspired and motivated. The challenge that I face is achieving action, achieving real change. It's sometimes easy to have the idea, to have the plan, to know how we're going to do it, but the government because we're sort of a closed forum here, I'll tell you what my personal perspective on this. We sometimes struggle with the last bit, which is action. And that's something that I've always struggled with. I've been a leader in the military and the public service. I struggled with it then. I'm a little more in the follower role in my current role, but I still struggle with it. The best leaders that I've ever seen in the public service have been able to do that. They've been able to take the ideas and turn them into concrete action. They can go home at night and ask themselves, because of me, what actually changed today for the better? And they have really big, exciting answers to that question every day. And it's hard. It's hard to achieve action, but that's why we need leadership. So that would be my word.
L'action, mais l'action pour le meilleur.
Bien sûr.
The change for the better. Yeah, and with the last few years, that's something that's continuously in motion. And even now, as public servants, as we're heading to the fall, that's in motion. So we will certainly remember that. Yeah. Are you ready for some questions? Sure. None of this is prepared, so we don't know what's coming.
And it doesn't have to be, any questions, any topic.
Any questions, any topic?
I'm appreciative of your time. So thank you for being here, and happy to talk about anything you'd like.
Alors, si vous êtes dans la salle, il y a un micro ici au centre. Alors, you can go and line up to ask your question. And online, so if you can raise your hand virtually so we can call upon you, open up your microphone, make sure that we can see you so you can ask your questions. Ne soyez pas gênée, madame. Yes, please go ahead. There's a microphone right there. And then, so if you want to line up just so we can see you. So we'll start with our very own CHRO, Madame Anne Cazot.
If it's not working, just say.
Awesome. Alors, merci beaucoup. I felt like I had to start the questions. Going to space, I'm sure nothing ever fails. How do you make sure that that doesn't happen? But obviously you must take risks, so things sometimes do fail. So how do you make sure that you come out from that?
Yeah, we take a very deliberate approach to risk mitigation, and it's based on, I mean, it's just based on time. It's based on simulating testing. So things do go wrong. In fact, if you're following the CFT mission right now, the first test flight of that vehicle I was talking about, it's in space right now. Lots of things have gone wrong, and we more or less expected it to. It's an immensely complicated system, and you will never, despite all your best efforts, be able to prove it, fully test it here with air and gravity. You can only do that by someday convincing yourselves that you're ready to take the next step. We say, okay, it's time to fly. We have to fly now. And you have to go out the door and take tremendous risk, which those two astronauts are taking right now for the cause of advancing this technology. Of course, we do not launch with our fingers crossed. That's not part of the risk mitigation strategy.
No, colleague.
No, there are superstitions, none of that. The entire strategy is based on preparation. And, you know, just to give you some context, we'll do simulations in the US that involve hundreds of people. So rocket people in Florida, rocket motor people in Denver, partner people at agencies like Canadian Space Agency, the mission control, flight control team, which is me in Houston. We have people actually all over the world. We'll use hundreds of people, very advanced simulations. We have what's the military would call a red force. We call it a white force, but this is an entire engineering department whose job it is to dream up ways that these systems can fail in ways that they suspect we haven't thought about, and then to make that happen and see us recover. And sometimes we recover, sometimes we don't, sometimes we find problems and end up redesigning software or hardware, but that's the process. It's iterative and it takes years. I mean, Starline has been on the drawing board for about 10 years now to get to the first flight, so it takes time.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to see if we have a question online. Natasha, do you see anything online, or yes?
Yes, so please, and I'm going to butcher this a little bit, I'm sorry. Akbarali Carson.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, we can hear you very well, and we can see you as well.
Yeah, sorry, my name is Akbar Carson. I'm with Survey General Branch. I apologize, Joshua, my resume is only one line, but I do have a question. So it's about leadership. And I want you to try and address the conflict between leadership and politics. And how we can, I quite understand how you work in the space with a common enemy out there, absolute zero, and you leave politics aside. That lets you be real leaders. How do we inform the ground from space? Like, how do we inform the ground from space to create better leaders? Am I articulating it in a good way, or?
Yeah, I think so. It's a big challenge. It's a big part of why we do space. I mean, there's thousands of reasons why we spend money in space, and most of them have to do with pragmatic benefits. But there's also that philosophical reason, which is that for some reason, somehow, it seems to me, if you look through history, and certainly the case with the space program, we have to do really hard things that we think are impossible in order to inspire humanity to bigger things, to betterness. And I think at the core of it, that's one of the most important reasons we do outer space. I mentioned Russia. There's not a lot of good things to say about the political situation with Russia right now, but we do have a good thing to say about it in space, because somehow, despite all of our differences, we have managed with Russia to create the International Space Station, and we are managing it through great adversity and challenge right now to continue to operate it. And at some level, that has to be taken as really important. I hope, you asked how do we impart that to the ground. I hope that people on the ground look at space and see literally going around the world every 90 minutes a shining example of how it could be. Those astronauts aboard the space station get along like best friends. They would risk their life in a flash for each other. And I hope that people see that as an example of how things could be different here on Earth. So I think the answer is we have to keep doing it. We have to keep doing the really hard things. That's why we have to go onto the moon, because we have to give humanity a better shining example of what we can do with energy and billions of dollars instead of things that we know we can do. Like, we know we can fight wars. We know we can make problems for the environment. We have to give people an example of what else we can do. So that's why I'm passionate about it. I hope that helps. It's a hard, thoughtful question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. On va tourner maintenant dans la salle. Madame, please go ahead.
Hi there. So I have a question from my 6-year-old. He wants to know, how does he become an astronaut? Aside from what Daddy says, which is, practice your letters, eat all your food, and go to bed on time.
Yeah, that warms my heart. Thank you for sharing. I have a 5-year-old. He asked me the same thing, and of course I get to travel and I meet thousands of 5 and 6-year-olds, and it is, people say it's inspiring for me to go talk to them, but it's inspiring for me to meet them because I'm reminded of what I was like when I was 5 or 6, and the energy and the enthusiasm and the motivation I had to do this. And I've gone to do it. I've been really lucky. But so it's just so awesome to hear that there's still 6-year-olds out there thinking stuff like that. He has to find a passion, something that energizes him and motivates him like nothing else. And it's never too early, I don't think, to find that. I found it when I was about his age. I was 6. I knew I wanted to be involved in space exploration. I refined that a little bit. Around junior high, I realized that if I couldn't go to space, what I could do, my absolute passion in life was going to be flying. I wanted to fly every kind of plane I could. I wanted to understand everything there was to understand about the engineering of flying. And that started guiding decisions for me in junior high, high school, university, of course, in my professional life. So I'm grateful for that I found something young that kept me up at night, that I couldn't stop thinking about, that I still am excited about, no matter what it is. If it has to do with aviation flying, I mean, it drives me crazy. And so I think that kids need to be on the lookout, encourage him to do so. It doesn't matter what the passion is, by the way, right? In my office down there, we have test pilots, a couple like myself, but we have veterinarians, we have geologists, every kind of scientist, we have doctor, we have the chief of the NASA astronaut office right now is a teacher. So it really does take all types. The thing they all have in common is that they had a passion and they got really, really good at it. So, good question. Tell them I say hi.
La passion, puis
Hi,
continue de
Rachel.
faire dodo de bonne heure, c'est ça? Go to bed early. That was one of the things that you said, right?
Yeah, go to bed early. Look after your body.
Eat your vegetables.
Eat your veg.
Natasha, do we have an online question? No? So, yeah, please go ahead.
I have 2 questions, one actually from my 5-year-old as well. If I understand correctly, I think he wants to know if space has a smell.
Ah,
Yeah, I'll tell you when I get back. Apparently, it does, in that in the space station, it smells terribly because it's a closed system, right? So there's no, I mean, through cargo there is, but generally right now when folks are there, it's a closed system in terms of mass. And so it reeks. It's terribly. It's something that's you can tell them it's a big obstacle. It's something that takes astronauts a long time to get used to. Astronauts who've gone outside into real space during spacewalks on the surface of the moon all do describe a smell that they've never smelled anywhere else in this universe except there. And so it's sort of hard to relate to unless you go and you do it, which of course I hope to and I'm looking forward to. And when I do and come back, I'm going to tell them exactly what that smells like.
And then my question is, what would you say for you or your team is the most challenging part of training to go to space?
Training for space has a lot of different aspects. I talk a lot about the technical parts. I like that stuff. My background's test flying. But to give you some other examples, I mean, I put the caves picture up there. I spent a lot of time learning language, Russian, which is a very hard language to learn as an adult, I would tell you. I think that the toughest part for me would probably be the language aspect. And I would also say more generally, the toughest part might be finding the right balance. So, you know, in all my previous jobs, you had your thing and you did that thing and it was hard and challenging, but it was that thing. As an astronaut, there's a lot of things. I mean, there's the spaceship and the flying and the spacesuits, there's all that, but there's the team skills and there's this kind of stuff, traveling around, talking to all sorts of different audiences. There's the language stuff. There's the psychiatry aspects to it. There's just this huge, diverse spectrum of things that people want you to do and you feel that they expect you to be good at. And so that the challenge at a purely interpersonal level is getting okay with that and figuring out a way to balance it all. And you end up disappointing people inevitably, but you have to get comfortable with it and you have to struggle to find the right balance. And for me personally, that's probably the most challenging part of the job.
On aurait le temps probablement pour une autre question.
Ouais.
Moi, j'en ai une.
Ouais.
Alors, vous vous préparez pour aller dans l'espace pour 6 mois.
Ouais.
J'imagine que tout ce qui va être là a été sélectionné, choisi pour la mission. Are you allowed one personal object, like a picture? Like, is there a little bit of discretion on the part of the astronaut to take with him or her?
Oui, nous sommes. Bonne question. C'est vrai que tous les astronautes qui vont voler dans l'espace sont vraiment sélectionnés. C'est aussi vrai que toutes les choses qui vont voler dans l'espace comme objet sont vraiment sélectionnées. But we are allowed. It's part of actually the approach to keeping astronauts psychologically healthy. And so I do get, it's about, I don't know, half this table, a box, and everything that goes into that box has to be seen and vetted and go through all these review boards. But yes, through all that, I can take photos, mementos, things that are important to me or to others, and we're going to do that. So, yeah.
Very nice. Nice to know. Oui, monsieur.
Yeah. Thank you. My question ties back to your comments on collaboration, but then your numerous references to technology and Canadian technology. So as a public servant, an engineer, researcher, walking that line of doing your work, coming to work every day for the public good, right? And the public good sometimes for our community extends to beyond the borders. So balancing that with the conversation on national interests, because we see it here in our work on a regular basis. So your approach and thinking on that.
Yeah, national interest versus wider interests across borders, I guess. I think you have to put Canada first. Conveniently, I think space is a place that lets us do both. So Canada first seems to align, from my perspective, quite well with what is a high priority for our partners. I mean, the Artemis Accords, these are hard questions, by the way, and important ones. But I'll talk just for a few minutes about the Artemis Accords. So I think this is what the U.S. is trying to do. This is their answer to your question. Look at Apollo, and I know we're out of time here, but Apollo, they went to the moon, and people are always asking, why haven't they gone back? And the reason they haven't gone back is because they don't want to go back like that, because they don't want to just go back for the national interest of the U.S. That's what they did in Apollo. They went there, they planted the flag, literally took pictures with it and came back. And if they wanted to do that again, absolutely, they would have done it 20 years ago. They know how to do that. What they're trying to do now, what Artemis is all about, is go back not for the national interests of the United States, but for the wider interests of as much of the world as they can bring. And so they invited Canada. Canada was the first partner to join. But if you're following this news, there's now well into the close to 30 other countries that have signed on to the Artemis Accords. And they're not all going to invent some big fancy thing and send an astronaut to the surface of the moon like Canada hopes to. But they have all signed on, 30 and growing, to an international framework partnership that says this is how we're going to do next phase exploration. This is how we're going to go into the final frontier. So it's norms for going there for the good of all, not the good of one national interest. And the U.S. is trying to lead this effort my read of it is to prioritize your question, which is to prioritize the wider good over what's good for any one particular country. Deep, important question, but that's why I'm so passionate about what we're doing right now with the US, with these other 30 countries, because it goes to that point. It goes to the wider good over the competitive niche interest of a single country. Hope that helps.
Alors, on arrive presque déjà à 11 heures. On vous a fait une promesse de vous garder jusqu'à 11 heures. So, ladies and gentlemen, as the tradition goes, you'll be able to continue to network. We'll be putting up some questions for you to network, to get to know your peers that are part of NRCan's community, supervisors, managers, and EXs. Pour ceux et celles qui sont en ligne, Natasha va préparer les séances CD, so there will be breakout rooms. You'll get to meet some of your peers. And Joshua, I believe you have a memento of your stay with us.
Oui.
Et j'invite I'd like to invite Francis Brisson, our ADM, to receive this as part of NRCan. Francis Brisson, our ADM for CMSS, and we'll be able to get a memento from you. And for all of you that are here at Council Hall, we also have that famous badge of Joshua's badge, so you'll be able to get those stickers, so you'll be able to take that back home to your son and to your son as well. So we'll have those over here for you that you can take away as a memento. Joshua, it was a great honor to have you, and I'd like to invite Francis to receive from you this photo.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us, and thank you to all for the important service that you give to our country. I hope that you continue to do so. I'm going to leave a quick memento, just saying thanks for the visit. I also leave this is one of our coins. It's from the astronaut office, and it has words on there that are very important to us. They're also very important to our discussion whenever we're discussing we did today about service to Canada and about leadership within the public service. So it says astronaut office, and the important words that are on there, this is the NASA astronaut office coin, are integrity, relationships, personal behavior, lifelong commitment, and stewardship. So thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Joshua. J'aimerais aussi remercier Jacqueline Anna qui a coordonné tout ça aujourd'hui. Merci à Zachary qui a été à la régie à l'arrière et ma gestionnaire Natacha Lesage. So thank you very, very much. So please keep networking, and we'll see you in the fall for our next leadership activity.
I just want to say a few things. So thank you so much for your energetic emceeing of this. You're always fabulous at what you're doing. Thank you for coming. Really inspirational. I'm glad you're the one who read what's on the coin, because there's no way I can read this. But in the end, it's all inspirational. And what I got from your session today is about bringing people together, collaboration. We kind of heard a lot of culture things in terms of like nothing can fail, right? So in the end, accountability of everyone in that role and so forth. And you're really an inspiration for us all. I'll be a cool dad coming back home and saying, I met an astronaut that will be in space soon. But anyway, a lot of the things that you shared with us are really great for on this day of National Public Service Week. Donc, merci à toi, and we'll definitely be following all your vos péripéties, and we'll hope to hear from you later and hear how that smells up there. Okay, good stuff. Thank you. Merci. Thank you. Thank you so much. Merci.
Thanks for encouraging me to come. That was really great.